Welcome to the Introduction to Material Requirements Planning, MRP. At the end of this topic, you will be able to explain the concepts behind materials requirement planning and the main steps in the process. We begin by introducing the concepts behind MRP in better to understand the process and its recommendations. We discuss definitions and planning data you will want to set up to run the MRP Wizard. Then we go through steps of the MRP Wizard. Finally, we examine the MRP results and see how to automatically generate production or purchasing documents from the recommendations. OEC Computers sells office equipment and supplies. Some of the items they sell are assembled and manufactured at OEC Computers labs. The procurement manager, Michelle, would like to be able to plan ahead for sales demands and item availability. The Material Requirements Planning, MRP, function lets you plan material requirements for complex manufacturing and procurement processes. To create and run MRP scenarios, you use the MRP Wizard. The Wizard generates recommendations, production orders, purchase orders, and inventory transfer requests, required to produce or procure the final product on time and in the required quantity. In the Order Recommendation Report, you create production and purchase orders based on these recommendations. Materials Requirements Planning, MRP, is a tool for managing inventory effectively so that materials are available for production and products are available for sales when and where they are needed without having to keep overly high stock levels. MRP compares the future demand for items against the stock on hand and the planned supply from purchases, production, or items in other warehouses. Planned supply can include purchase orders, production orders, inventory transfer requests and purchasing blanket agreements. Existing demand comes from incoming sales and inventory needs and planned demand by forecasts. In order to receive recommendations for buying, producing or transferring items, you run the MRP Wizard. The MRP run also takes into account defined planning rules like order multiples and minimum order quantity and also required lead time for the supply or manufacturing of the item. Note: throughout this course we refer to material as items or quantity in order to align with SAP Business One terminology. In order to understand the MRP logic better, let's look in more detail at the three types of sources used in the MRP run: demand, stock on hand and supply. Demand tells us how much item quantity will be needed in the future. Demand is derived from the following optional sources: sales documents including sales orders, sales blanket agreements, reserve invoices, sales quotations, and recurring order transactions. A forecast for the anticipated quantity needed for the item. Production orders for the child items of a BOM. Defined inventory levels including minimum, maximum, and required inventory levels. And inventory transfer requests for the origin warehouse of planned transfers of the items. To meet the demands, the Wizard looks at the stock on hand, item quantities currently in the warehouse, and expected supply. The expected supply of item quantity is derived from the following optional sources: purchase orders, purchase requests, purchase quotations, and purchase blanket agreements. Production order for the demand of the parent item of the BOM. An inventory transfer request for the target warehouse of planned transfers of the items. The results from the MRP run are the MRP recommendations to buy, transfer, or make the quantity needed. The recommended documents can be purchase orders or purchase request for purchased items, inventory transfer requests, and production orders for items that are produced in-house. In the example shown, you can see an illustration of the recommendations given by MRP. At the top, we see the situation before MRP is run. The initial stock quantity is represented in gold. Initially there were 20 pieces in stock. A purchase order exists for 30 pieces. We expect those receipts shortly in the future based on the lead times for the items. We have requirements for 40 pieces from existing sales orders. We have a sales forecast for 50 additional pieces in the near future, and later on we expect demand for additional 30 pieces. When we run MRP, we receive recommendations for 3 purchase orders to fulfill the requirements. MRP considered the initial stock, planned supply, and existing and forecasted demand. Before running MRP, you need to define planning data. The main planning data consists of definitions in the item master data records. In addition, there is also an option to define a forecast for anticipated demand of the items. Once the planning data is set up, you can run the MRP Wizard on demand. The results of the MRP run are recommendations for creating documents to produce, purchase or transfer the needed items. The final step in the MRP process is to use the recommendations to create the needed supply documents, such as production orders, inventory transfer requests or purchase orders, to meet the demand. These documents can be automatically generated via the order recommendation window. In this next section, we will go through each MRP process steps. Here we see a list of planning data that can affect MRP. These definitions are optional and you may decide that some are not relevant for you. No particular order of definition is required. Each item has a section for planning data in the item master. These settings affect how the item is handled in terms of MRP. If an item is produced, then the component parts are listed in a bill of materials, BOM. When MRP is run, the system checks if all the components are available for making the item. In our example, we will consider an item that is purchased, so we will not discuss how to create BOMs in this unit. BOMs are discussed in the unit on production. Projected demand can be added to current demand using a sales forecast. Additionally, there are configuration settings that can affect MRP. On the Planning Data tab of the Item Master Data window, you can set definitions relevant for the MRP run. For each item you can define whether or not it is included in the MRP run by choosing MRP or none in the Planning Method field. In the Procurement Method field you can define whether you purchase the item or produce it. This setting affects the default for the type of recommendation you receive from the MRP run. Note, in both cases the recommendation can be to transfer the item from another warehouse. The order interval field specifies the frequency for order recommendations. You can define many intervals and choose the relevant interval for each item when needed. The order interval definition can be useful when an agreement exists with a vendor, for example, to order once a week, for example on Mondays only. MRP automatically groups recommended orders into interval groups for your convenience. The order multiple specifies the lot size to use in an MRP run. For example, if the value is 50, MRP will recommend order the item in multiples of 50. So if you need 80 items and the value is 50, the system will recommend ordering 100 items. The minimum order quantity field allows you to specify a minimum lot size. The order multiple and minimum order quantity definitions can also be a representation of a supply agreement with the vendor. The lead time field is used to calculate the duration of time to produce the item or receive the item when buying it. The last field in the list is the tolerance days. An expected supply may arrive within a few days after the actual demand date, and sometimes it would be okay to delay delivery. This functionality minimizes recommendations and satisfies demand with the expected supply due within the tolerance period. In the tolerance days field, indicate how many days you are willing to tolerate. If you are using the Advanced Availability to Promise functionality, ADP, you will also have the option to specify a checking rule. For more information on Advanced ADP, see the course topic on automating the sales process. In addition to entering the planning data directly in each item master data record, you can also define the planning data at the item group level. This definition is copied automatically to the item master data as a default. Here we see a simple bill of materials used for producing a printer. A production bill of materials represents an item to be produced. The sub-items in the bill of materials are items that will be needed to produce the top-level item. The sub-items can either be items that are purchased or made. These are typically physical items that are stored in inventory. More info on bills of materials can be found in the Bills of Materials topic. You can create forecasts to plan purchasing, production or transfers in advance, even before you receive other actual requirements like sales orders. In OEC computers, sales orders are often received at short notice. Some of the items they sell have long lead times. If OEC computers relied on only sales orders to drive their production and purchasing, they would not be able to meet demand because on the customer's required dates. That is why they use forecasts. By using a forecast, they can purchase or produce items based on predictions of when the items will be needed. When the actual sales orders arrive, they are able to supply the goods even at short notice. In the image we see an illustration of a weekly forecast for the hard disk item in OEC computers. To make sure there are sufficient hard disks on hand to meet expected orders, Michelle prepares a weekly forecast for the item. She bases her forecast on last year's sales figures and adds a certain margin for the current year. Then, when she runs MRP, the recommended quantities already include the forecasted demand. At OEC, they have found that some items sell better in different regions. To handle the differences, they create and maintain forecasts for items per warehouse. To avoid duplication of sales order demand and forecast demand, you can define in the general settings that forecasts are consumed by actual sales orders. You can learn more about forecasts and how they are consumed in the topics MRP Intelligent Forecast and MRP Forecast Consumption. There are two types of forecasts, basic and intelligent. The intelligent forecast function enables you to use various algorithms for forecasting product demands in an intuitive way. In order to create a new basic forecast, go to the MRP main menu and then choose Forecast. Each row contains the forecasted quantities for an item. The quantity entered is based on the sales unit of measurement for the item. For example, if the item is sold in cartons of 12, then the forecast is based on the number of cartons. The item quantity can be managed on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. This view definition cannot be changed once the forecast is saved. Enter the start and end date to define the forecast period. After entering required quantities, you can increase or decrease the quantities of selected items. Just choose the relevant item rows and then use the plus or minus button to increase or decrease the quantities with each click. Intelligent forecast using the power of SAP HANA to automatically predict future sales based on previous year's data. Select the items you wish to forecast by warehouse, by preferred vendor or item. Items can be chosen by using a range or by item group. The tool allows you select which documents to use as history, sales orders, invoices, or deliveries. A graphical item-by-item report predicts sales for the selected time frame. The predicted quantity appears for each period and a graph below shows both the historical data and the forecast. The forecast appears in orange. You can verify the accuracy of the prediction by dragging the time bar to a past data to see if the actual sales match the prediction. Here we have dragged back the time bar and the prediction in orange is compared to the actual sales in blue. This forecast is very dynamic. You can change the time buckets or data to instantly revise predictions. You can also use custom calculation methods to run your predictions. MRP Analysis looks backward from the due date of an order, starting with the lead time for the items in a sales order, and then cascading all of the other lead times and bills of materials for components to determine whether all materials can be obtained on time. MRP Analysis also reaches forward and reduces forecasted quantities so that inventory does not unintentionally get too high. This is called consuming forecasts. Excess inventory sometimes builds up after companies prepare annual, quarterly, and monthly forecasts for the number of units they plan to ship in order to avoid stock shortages and maintain on-time deliveries. If a company plans production based on forecasted quantities and then adds actual ordered quantities to the forecasts, production may exceed actual needs and inventory may be inflated. To avoid this situation, SAP Business One can reduce forecasted quantities by actual order quantities. As a result, only the net forecast quantity, forecast minus ordered quantity, will be added to the MRP run. This capability of the MRP functionality of SAP Business One is important because forecasts are considered sources of demand for MRP. This means that if you make a forecast that orders for 50 units will come in during a certain period, MRP treats that forecast as actual orders and generates production orders so that the items are ready when needed. Continuing with this example, assume that an actual order for 10 units comes in. Now, MRP will adjust the forecast downward by the 10 units ordered to avoid a buildup of excess inventory. You can set the default for whether sales orders are consumed by forecasts in the general settings, but it can be changed at the row level of a sales order. There are numerous configuration settings for MRP that can fine-tune your planning. Although we cannot go into detail in this topic, here is a list of some additional settings you might consider. After you have defined your planning data, you are ready to run the MRP Wizard. The Wizard is a 6-step process, and the final step presents recommendations derived from the parameters defined in the former steps. In step 1 you can select a scenario or create a new one. Then in step 2 you define a planning horizon of the MRP recommendations and definitions affecting the lead time calculation. After that, in step 3 you choose the items to include in the MRP run. In step 4 you choose whether to run MRP at the company level or at the warehouse level. In step 5 you review the different sources of demand and supply that can be included in the MRP calculation and set your recommendation preferences. Step 6 is when the system provides the MRP recommendations. The MRP scenario is a set of parameters defined by the user that defines the scope of the MRP run. You can define several MRP scenarios for each company, but only one scenario can be used for each MRP run. In the first step of the Wizard, you can either choose an existing scenario or create a new one. In the second step, you define the details for the scenario. You set dates and the periods for the planning horizon. This is the time frame that will be considered in the MRP run. MRP will consider all the demands and supplies that have a due date within the planning horizon. If you've defined holidays and weekends, then MRP will take those into consideration when running. Select the items you wish to include in the MRP run. You can either run MRP with the planning parameters you defined previously for each item in the Item Master Data window, or you can define a set of parameters when running the MRP Wizard and apply them to all the selected items in the MRP run. The parameters you define here are used only during the MRP run and are not saved in the Item Masters. It is possible to change the parameters at runtime, and you can rerun MRP multiple times to effectively do what-if analyses with different parameter values. If you are running MRP for an item with a bill of materials, child items are included in the MRP run. First you decide whether you want to run MRP collectively for the entire company or to have it calculate requirements separately by warehouse. By default, MRP will consider existing inventory, demand, and supply. You choose whether you want to consider the existing inventory or the minimum inventory level. You can also include a forecast to be consumed by sales orders. If you choose company, it will consolidate the existing inventory, demand, and supply for all warehouses and make recommendations to the default warehouse for the item. If you choose warehouse, it calculates the values separately for each warehouse. You've already chosen a planning horizon for your MRP run, but you also have the option to include historical data in the run. Then you decide which sources of supply and demand to include in this MRP run. Which supply documents do you wish to include from purchasing? You can include purchase requests, purchase quotations, purchase orders, AP reserve invoices and blanket purchase agreements as expected receipts. Which demand documents do you wish to include from sales? You can include sales quotations, sales orders, AR reserve invoices and blanket sales agreements as requirements. In addition to specifying the type of document, you can also specify particular documents. For example, instead of selecting all sales orders, you specify which sales orders should be included. Do you wish to include production orders and inventory transfer requests? Open production orders for parent items are expected receipts. In addition to considering existing inventory, you can also consider required, minimum and maximum inventory levels. And of course you can include a sales forecast as an additional requirement. The data that you get as output from the material requirements planning in SAP Business One are recommendations for production orders and purchase orders, depending on the procurement method maintained in the item master record. You can also define whether you wish to have MRP recommend inventory transfer requests when running MRP by warehouse. The MRP results window appears after you run the MRP Wizard. The schedule for the MRP demands appear on the Report tab. You can open the results for each item to display information on the initial inventory, the supply, the demand, and the final inventory. You can click on any raised cell to see the pegging information with sources or recommendations that add up to the quantity that appears in the cell. More information on how to view and work with MRP results is in the additional training topics on MRP. The Recommendations tab displays any recommended purchase orders, purchase requests, production orders, and inventory transfer requests, if you have included them. To issue the actual orders, you use the Order Recommendations function. In the final step of the MRP process, you use the Order Recommendations window to create the documents needed to satisfy the demand for products. In this step, you bring all your experience and knowledge to this process to supplement what SAP Business One has done. The Order Recommendation is a separate window that allows you to update and change fields displayed in the Recommendation tab of MRP results as well as generate supply documents. The data displayed in this window comes from the last saved MRP run recommendations for the selected scenario. In the Order Type field, choose the desired document to generate based on the recommendation, and check the Create box. Documents include purchase quotations and purchase requests as well as purchase orders, production orders, and inventory transfer requests. You can make changes to the data in the proposed documents, such as moving dates, changing quantities, or vendors. From the context menu of the item number field you can generate different reports already filtered for the item, like alternative items and last prices report. These reports can help you adjust the row data before creating the documents. You can also choose whether or not to consolidate documents to the same vendors. This can help reduce costs in two ways: you minimize the number of documents you generate and perhaps achieve greater discounts. Here are some key points to take away from this course. The Material Requirements Planning, MRP, is a planning tool that calculates material requirements for produced or purchased items by processing the demand, supply, and stock on hand. To receive recommendations for buying, producing or transferring items we run the MRP Wizard. The demand for items is derived from sales documents, a forecast, production orders, sales blanket agreements, defined inventory levels and inventory transfer requests. The Wizard considers expected supply from purchase orders, purchase quotations, purchase requests, production orders, and purchase blanket agreements. The results of the MRP run are the MRP recommendations. The recommended documents can be purchase orders, purchase requests, purchase quotations, inventory transfer requests and production orders. Forecasts are used to plan stock level in advance, before receiving actual requirements, such as sales orders. In the planning data of the item master, you can set parameters, such as order multiples and lead time, that affect MRP recommendations. An MRP scenario is a set of parameters defined throughout the Wizard steps that is used to determine the MRP results. The horizon is the period for which the Wizard displays the MRP results. There are 4 elements in the MRP result: initial inventory, supply, demand, and final inventory. From the Order Recommendation window we can generate recommended documents. You have completed the Introduction to Material Requirements Planning. Thank you for your time.